Hello and welcome back to our webcast series on the topic of orthographic projection. So in this video we're going to look at how to take a secondary auxiliary view, or in other words how to take an auxiliary view off of an auxiliary view. So to begin, we'll just have a quick look over our auxiliary elevation and our auxiliary plan that we've seen in our previous videos. So for our auxiliary elevation to start with, essentially what we're doing is we're looking at our object from a different direction and we're walking around the object to take our new auxiliary view. So if you can imagine, instead of standing here in front of the object looking straight in, giving us our front elevation, we're just walking around the object and looking at it from a new direction. And in this case here, our x1, y1 line in our plan view will represent an edge view of our auxiliary plane, and then that's going to be pushed back, giving us our auxiliary elevation. And in our auxiliary elevation, the x1, y1 line will represent the ground. So that's why our heights here are exactly the same as the heights that our object is off the ground in our front elevation. So that's an auxiliary elevation. In our auxiliary plan view then, instead of walking around the object, what we're doing is in our front elevation we're looking at the object from an angle. So we're looking at a slope, either below the object looking up at an angle or from above the object looking down at an angle. And in this case here, the x1, y1 line in our front elevation represents an edge view of our auxiliary plane, and here in our auxiliary plane, our x1, y1 line will represent an edge view of the vertical plane or the back wall. So what we have here in our auxiliary, the distances that we have here is the distance that our object is out from the back wall, and that corresponds to our plan view here, and the distance our object is out from the back wall, because in our plan view the xy line will represent the vertical plane or back wall. And if you have any difficulty remembering where do you take your distances for any auxiliary, you can always use the 1-2 rule. And what that means is that if you're trying to draw your auxiliary here, well, we're dealing at the moment with our x1, y1 line. So if you count back one previous xy line, that gives us our xy line here. And then this is the view we're trying to draw. If you count back two previous views, so back one view, back two views, that means that we're dealing with the plan view and we're taking our distances from the xy line. So these distances here are transferred to our auxiliary plan view. And in both cases of our auxiliary elevation and our auxiliary plan, what we're doing is just basically moving ourselves around the object, either walking around the object like in an auxiliary elevation, or looking at the object from a slope as in our auxiliary plan. Now, where does our secondary auxiliaries come into play? Well, if you take the example here of an object that is angled away from us, but at the same time we have a surface that is sloping away from us. Well, if I wanted to find the true shape of this surface by simply walking around the object like so, well, we're not going to see a true shape of that because the object is, or the surface is still sloping away from us. If I want to see the true shape of this surface, well, I'm going to have to do two things. One is going to be walking around the object, and then I'm going to also have to look at it at an angle. And this is why we need a secondary auxiliary, because we need to walk around the object in one auxiliary, and then we need to take another auxiliary looking at it from a slope. We can only do one movement in any one given auxiliary. So to do this, we're going to first of all set ourselves up for our first auxiliary elevation, and instead of looking at it straight in like that, we're actually going to walk around and we're going to look at it such that we see the surface here as an edge view. The reason for this is because each auxiliary is projected perpendicular to the one previous to it. So we're going to project an auxiliary elevation first of all from this direction, and then we're going to project a second one perpendicular from that. This will make a little bit more sense when we see it in our 3D as we go along. But essentially we're going to walk along here like that and look in such that this surface here is seen as an edge view. So we're looking along our line here, which is a true length line. You have to look along a true length line, and we're going to project it onto an auxiliary plane. So in our plan view, our x1, y1 line is an edge view of our first auxiliary plane. So there's our auxiliary plane like so. This is looking from above, seen as an edge. Here it is as an edge. And then what we do is we push it back down, or we project our image onto that. There's our image projected like so. We just push it back, giving us our auxiliary elevation, our first auxiliary. So there is our object like that. On your sheet, in order to draw that, you're going to project these lines on and take our heights from our elevation. And what that's going to give us is an edge view. So this is what we want to what we're looking for. Now you only need to draw in this particular surface here. You don't necessarily need to draw in the entire object. I'm going to do it in this example here just to make it a little bit clearer, but you know, usually if you're projecting an auxiliary like that, just project the surface that you're looking for. But so on your sheet we're going to continue our lines like so, and we're going to take our heights from our elevation and project them onto or transfer them to our auxiliary. And in our 3D view we can see there's exactly the same thing. The heights that we have in our front elevation are taken from the ground, and they're exactly the same as the height our auxiliary is off the ground. Because if our object is, for argument's sake, 20 millimeters off the ground here, well, we expect it to be 20 millimeters off the ground here. It won't change by just walking around the object. So that's our first auxiliary taken. So that's the walking around the object part of our question kind of taken care of. The next thing we want to do is well, actually, we might just explain where this is coming from. You can see here we have our edge view like so, hinged down like so. So that's where that's coming from in our view over here. So what we're going to do then is position ourselves into our new position to take our secondary auxiliary. So looking down at our slope like so. So in our auxiliary here, that's going to be looking straight in at our object. So straight in means perpendicular, and our x1, y1 line is going to be parallel to our edge view like so. So in this view here, this x2, y2 line is going to be the edge view of a new secondary auxiliary plane. So there is our secondary auxiliary plane like that, and you can see it's perpendicular to this first auxiliary plane. You can see the plane itself is going to be parallel to the surface we're trying to find. So when I'm looking straight down at it like that, what I'm going to see is going to be projecting straight onto this new auxiliary plane. And this is why we looked at an edge view first of all, to position this first plane in a place where our second plane here was going to be parallel with the edge view that we're trying to look for. So this is what we're trying to achieve. Like in our first auxiliary, how we're going to do that is going to be by first of all projecting our image onto the edge view of our plane. This is it represented here, and then we're going to hinge it down flat like so. Now where do we take our distances from? Well, it's probably going to be a little bit easier to understand if we look at it over here in our 3D view. If we maneuver ourselves around so we can see exactly what our observer is looking at, well, what we're going to see is going to be this auxiliary view. But if we just have a quick look, move our observer around, but just keep an eye on our auxiliary plane 1 and see as our observer looks at our object, that first auxiliary plane is here seen as an edge lined up with our x2, y2 line. So in our auxiliary here, this x2, y2 line represents an edge view of our first auxiliary plane. So that's very, very important, because if you look at the relationship between our auxiliary to that edge view and our plan view, you see that they're both exactly the same. So if I add in my dimensions here, you can see, let's say this edge here, well, that's, let's say 20 millimeters out from my auxiliary plane number 1. Well, you can see the plan view is exactly the same distance. So applying our 1-2 rule, you can see that if I'm trying to draw this view here, I count back 1 view, 2 views, I'm dealing with the x2, y2 line. My xy line then, or x1, y1 line, is my previous xy line. So there's my continuation of my lines like so, and I'm taking my distances from the x1, y1 line to my plan view, and I'm transferring them across here. So that's where I get my distances from my second auxiliary. And it would be the same if I took an auxiliary off of that again. I'd be counting back 2 views, 1 xy line. You can see here as we move it across into our 3D view, you can see our distances here are off of our auxiliary plane 1 in exactly the same way that our plan view is going to be exactly the same distance. So the closest edge is going to be this distance in both our auxiliary and our plan view. The furthest edge is going to be this distance in both our auxiliary and our plan view. So our auxiliary plane 1 becomes the reference plane for our dimensions, and that's why our x1, y1 line here is taken to our plan view. So that's probably the trickiest thing to imagine or visualize when you see it in this folded out state here. So to finish, I'm just going to fold out our object here and fold it back up again, so just to maybe give you an idea of exactly what's going on. So here we are, we can see there's our object. Fold it out flat first, so you can imagine in our plan view The x2, y2 line is going to represent this second plane here seen as an edge. And then what we're going to do is, you can see there it is as an edge. We're hinging him out like so. So that's our second auxiliary there, as we have him as like so. So I'm going to just fold him back up again. So he's folded up like so, and he's going to be folded up like so. So that's where each of our auxiliaries combine to give us the true shape of our surface. And using this idea here, you can pretty much get a view of any object from any direction, so you have total freedom at where you look at your object. And that completes our video on our secondary auxiliaries. As always, I hope this has been of some benefit to you, and stay tuned for more videos. Thank you very much.